All right, thanks everybody. Like Ryan said, I'm Nick Sweet. I work for Avertium. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, so not too far away from you guys in South Carolina. So a little bit about myself. As I said, I lead our solutions architecture team at Avertium. We're a professional service, managed service security company. We've been in business for over about 22 years when you look at kind of a lot of our founding companies. Myself, I've been in the security industry going on about 13, 14 years. I started out in the Department of Energy working for Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where I did a lot of security and kind of government contracts. At the time we had three of the world's fastest supercomputers, so I did a lot of security around that, DoD projects. And if you're not familiar with ORNL, it was where part of the Manhattan Project during World War II, when it did a lot of the building the bombs and stuff. But now it's a really large research laboratory, so got exposed to a lot of good science research and things. If you guys are into that sort of thing, did a stint at University of Tennessee, helping build their security program. Moved on to Nielsen, where I did a lot of security operations, pen testing, doing the red teaming and stuff there. And now and then when I moved to Avertium, I led our managed security practice. So security operations, making sure that, basically a lot of the stuff that Ryan just talked about, operationally making sure we had the right processes, procedures in place to help protect our customers on a day-to-day basis. So I'm really excited to be here today. And as we go through here, I don't know if people are allowed to ask questions or whatever, feel free to jump in. I'd love for this to be interactive. It gets kind of lonely up here without any interaction. So you guys feel free to jump in, interrupt, ask questions, and then I'll go ahead and get started. So today, this is just a quick outline. If you got to see the abstract, what we're talking about today is really just nothing new, but hopefully it'll give you a few tidbits or things that you can take back to your organization to help with security operations, threat hunting, incident response, and just general investigation within your organizations. Because I know everybody here probably comes from different size organizations. Not everybody works for a Fortune 500, where you might have 100 people on your security team plus, or we probably have some people in here that you're the IT person, the security person, and the CISO, and you wear all the hats within the organization. So hopefully there's some things in here that are beneficial to that full wide range of audience, because I think some of the concepts that you'll see in here can be leveraged across the board. So we'll just do a quick history intro. I kind of hit some history about myself there. I'll introduce some things that are probably not new to everybody here. You've probably seen them before in a lot of other talks that you've been to. Then we'll move into some, why notebooks. There's been a lot of work. I know Cyber War Dog does a lot of great things around threat hunting playbooks and stuff. But I want to put just a little spin on that and hopefully bring it up a level. A lot of times, when you're in security operations, you're, the technical guy in the room. You spend a lot of time, in the command line or the SIM or your technologies, and sometimes you might lose the kind of what's the business driver here? How can I relate this to, what the company needs? And can I leverage my technical expertise to, show leadership why we need to do certain things? So we'll go into a little detail on that. So moving in. So one of the concepts that, we like to use at Avertium, and, you see this a lot, is transitioning from that old aspect around traditional SecOps and really into more of a cyber fusion approach. And, what we'll go into here in a little bit is, we have two main themes, and it's really around know thyself and know thy enemy. Today, we're really going to focus on know thy enemy, because that's really where the threat hunting comes in. You need to know a little bit of yourself, right? Because that really drives where you can do, some specific threat hunts. But when you're doing the threat hunting, right? I mean, that's the key word, is the threat, right? What is the threat actor doing? What are they looking for? What are the types of information, that they're looking for to be able to protect? And I'm only seeing cover slide or presentation. Is
Yeah,
that
Nick,
just me,
we're only seeing it looks like the PowerPoint view. It's not even in presenter mode, so we just see the Avertium slide. It's
okay?
maybe stop sharing and reshare. It looks like you may be frozen. I don't see a cursor moving on your screen either.
Okay. We'll try that again.
We'll see the Cyber Fusion slide now.
All right, perfect. Hey, thanks, Tim, there for letting me know. So yeah, so this is what we're going into here. Just now that you have the visual, is really this concept of pulling all the pieces together into this more of a cyber fusion and having the different parts of security really working together, not having your governance and your risk and compliance and policy team doing their thing in one area, having your red team do one thing, your blue team do another. It's really, how do you come together and have this kind of fusion structure? And by doing that, one of the things that we like to focus on is really around how do we assess and measure maturity. It can be, in the first where like know thyself, you might be using a security framework like the NIST CSF. You could be using, the CIS top 20, or I guess it's the top 18 now. It's going to take me a long time to get used to that. But, really focusing in on like, what are the security controls and things, and really measuring to that going forward. And this is, a pretty standard maturity model. And you're going to see how we try to apply this, not only from, say, a holistic program level standpoint, but how can we apply this at a more tactical, technical level around how you're doing your threat hunting, how you're diving in and really relating that up into, business decisions, business risk, and the things that your executives, really care about. Being in the industry for 13, 14 years, it's one of those things to where, if you want to be a really good security professional, for the most part, at least if you want to move up, I'm not going to say, let me rephrase that. But as you move up in the organization, you really have to start understanding what's important to the business. And a lot of times you're having to sell. You're either selling up, you're selling to other people on your team. That could be another security engineer that you're working with. That could be the sysadmin. That could be the application owner. There's a lot of things that go into, kind of the political landscape within the organization. So hopefully some of these things that we go over will help with that. So starting with some frameworks, I think, if you go to any security talk nowadays, especially within security operations, I'm sure MITRE ATT&CK you've probably heard a million times, and we could probably turn this into a drinking game. But, it's still a really important thing when it comes to measuring success within your security operations center. And like, what should I be looking for when I'm out there spending my time, digging through the SIM, digging through my logs or my endpoint or my EDR or whatever that is, to really get a sense of what I should be looking for. And it can't be, we can't, with adding to that, though, what are some other things that we can really add to that from a security perspective? So jumping in from a threat hunt perspective, right? So trying to level set is, if you're new to security operations, you're not quite sure, so what is this threat hunting that we're talking about today? So threat hunting is, just really the process of proactively going and looking for stuff. And the key thing when you're going to go look for stuff, right, is you need to have data to be able to sift through. So you'll see here just a high level process diagram. If you go to the internet, this is pretty straightforward. Nothing necessarily groundbreaking, and it's a pretty straightforward concept, right? Is instead of sitting around and waiting for your tools and technologies to tell you to do something, is like, why don't we take the time to actually go into our technologies and see what we can find based on certain intelligence and stuff that we see. And when we think about, what we can look for, at Avertium, we think of it as in three different buckets. You have your more, what I like to call your more temporal stuff, the things that are maybe of urgency. Maybe you got a threat intelligence report from some threat vendor that you all have, or maybe some, CSIRT that went out that said, hey, this particular APT group is looking and exploiting X, Y, and Z. You think of your solar gates, think of, the dark side with Colonial Pipeline, think of, some of the more recent ones. There's a lot of different, things that you can turn on the news and say, wait a second, what's going on? Then you have the bucket more around what we kind of call is the catch-all, right? This is where you're using MITRE ATT&CK to where regardless, of who the APT group is behind it and having very specific procedures, that they're going to be using is, if you just hire a pen tester or if you're doing red teaming yourself internally, these are the steps and techniques that you might leverage within your environment. If y'all were on the talk, earlier with, Ryan, he went over, low bins and, living off the land techniques and certain things there, right? Is, regardless of who the, bad guy is, it could be a good guy or a bad guy. If someone's doing offensive security, there's certain things that you leverage to try to get into those environments. So really doing just those more generic kind of catch-all type of hunts. And then the final one, the way we look at it is really identifying IOCs. And this one, it could be considered, threat hunting. Sometimes this is more just a continuing investigation. But when you do find particular IOCs, maybe you were, doing an investigation, you saw one of your workstations or servers that got hit with, a piece of ransomware, a piece of malware, or whatever else, and you find those registry keys or the IP addresses that maybe it was reaching out to, and you start doing a deeper dive investigation across your entire environment for where else, that might happen, right? Is maybe it was a phishing email that someone clicked on and you found it on one system, but did other people get that same phishing email? Did they click on it? So using some of those IOCs, you can do some of those threat hunts across your environment, and really see, what was the scale of that particular attack. And so once we establish those hypotheses, right, then we perform those hunts, and then you have to utilize your technologies in your environment. And like I said earlier, there's a lot of great tools out there, but not everybody has access to the latest, greatest EDRs. You don't have access to, maybe a SIM. Maybe you're just sending stuff into a syslog server and you have to comb through and have custom scripts that you comb through those logs to try to find things. It's not everybody has the liberties to have, an unlimited budget to spend on security. So whatever that is right. You need to understand what your capabilities are and then be able to go and then look within those particular environments. And then once you do those hunts, right, refine those detections. As you go in and you start out with that first hypothesis, you might get tons and tons of information back. The classic example, right, is, PowerShell. PowerShell is something that people use within your environment. And if you go and just say, hey, show me everywhere PowerShell is being run in my environment, you might get hundreds and thousands and thousands of different, techniques that end up, coming back, or, results that come back. And you might have to refine that detection over and over again. But the good thing is once you refine those detections over time, those detections and analytics get better. And then at that point, right, you detect those threats once you've defined and built out those detections. And then you move into the actual triage remediate, right? This is once you find those within your environment, what are your playbooks? How do you get those out? And how do you make sure that, they don't get in again by using lessons learned for the future? And so taking a step further, right? So we had mentioned earlier, is like, so where do you focus when it comes to threat hunting? You talked about developing those hypotheses. And if you're not familiar with this is a pyramid of pain. I think it's a Bianco that came up with this, that, if you're really going to focus your time, where should you do it at? And that's where the TTPs come in. You could spend all day looking for IP addresses, hash values, domain names, but how easy is it for a bad guy to actually go in and change those things, right? Is, hey, I have a piece of ransomware malware, it drops to a box. And, how many times does that hash value, change when it gets written? And a lot of times people don't write to disk anymore, right? They're staying in memory. So a lot of these techniques, just don't really work. I mean, that's why you see a lot of AV solutions, dying, is because that detection mechanism is not something that really works. And then maybe you're a good blue teamer. You go take that piece of malware, you detonate it, and you find the IP addresses that, are in there. You go put a firewall block in place, and next thing you know, you still see traffic going out, because guess what? There was actually some domain names that those IP addresses were registered to. So you continue to do your research, And all right, well, maybe you have some type of proxy or DNS filtering in place. And so as you can see, as you continue to do this, it just really turns into a whack-a-mole type of approach. So if you really focus in on the top end of this around TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, regardless of what domain it's reaching out to or IP address it's reaching out to, if I'm looking for very specific procedures and techniques, it really gives you a better detection mechanism within your environment. So hopefully that makes sense. Like I said, this is, really a lot of the lead up pieces to this. And now taking that, so using the MITRE ATT&CK. So one of the things that we like to do at Avertium and helping our customers is really help them get an understanding of where they should look at, right? So using MITRE ATT&CK, using that maturity matrix that we talked about earlier, right around CMMM, is where does a customer start out? It's like, hey, what are my detection mechanisms? A lot of times when you're thinking about, attack, the attack framework and SIM monitoring, a lot of that's very reactive and detection based. And maybe start at the beginning, right? It's like, of these, hundreds and hundreds of techniques and sub-techniques, which ones actually make sense to my environment? So have an initial risk score. So go in and actually identify which ones make sense to your environment. And then do some, kind of, what are our protections there? Are we able to prevent against those particular attacks and those particular techniques? Then we get into the detection piece, right? How are we able to detect that? How are we able to, do we have rules in the SIM? Do we have a SIM? Are we even logging for that particular technique? So really getting an understanding of what that detection score looks like. And then finally, how are you able to respond? Do you have the appropriate playbooks? Do you have the right workflows? Do you know who to call, who to reach out to? Do you have the skill set internally? Do you need to have a partner or a DFR retainer with somebody that come in and help when that incident happens? And then finally, how do I map that back to like a threat intelligence group? If I know I'm in a certain industry, or a certain or a certain part of the the world, if you work for a very global, a large global organization, there's certain threat groups that you might need from just like a geopolitical standpoint, right? If you're working, if you're doing business in China, you might have things there, or Russia, or Europe, or whatever. There's certain things that you might need to think about from a threat group's perspective. And based on all that information, that can then give you kind of a residuals risk score of where I should be focusing. And then with that, right, this is where you want to start your focus around, where you're doing your hunting, because then you're going to have, kind of leftover TTPs that this is where I need to focus, because I definitely have some type of risk here to be able to focus on in the future. So taking that a step further now. So that was the lead in, a little bit of history. Let's say, hopefully, if you read the abstract, a lot of that, I wanted just to be really just introductory. And hopefully now I'm going to introduce, some maybe newer concepts if you're not using notebooks or anything within your organization today. And I know, Ryan had mentioned, using like OneNote. Jupyter is almost like our OneNote to an extent. It just really provides us, the more technical deep dives that sometimes you can't do within a OneNote or, a text document or something like this. It really builds some interactive capabilities for when, you're trying to look and search for things. So the first thing when we're thinking about this is, when we're building these notebooks, is I really want to kind of orientate you all into kind of like building a pipeline and having this be a modular approach. And not only having these be something that are consumed by your analyst team or consumed by your engineering team, is if you build a modular approach to these are things that you can use to help your team go and ask for things within your organization. And those things usually being technologies, tools, budget, more people, or whatever. So if you can come up with, using some type of framework like this to where you can share this with the executive team, this really helps you tell the story of what you're doing day in and day out. And so why don't we make this stuff pretty? I think, for us is, spending that extra little bit of time, really cleaning it up, not just doing the hunt within the SIM and just leaving it there and opening a ticket, is can we abstract that up an additional layer and spend that extra 50%, effort to really turn this into a work deliverable that can really help your team within your organization or your customers if you're actually a service provider. So what does that look like? So within, I just pulled a few of these here. Within Jupyter, there's a lot of great things from like, Plotly and Cufflinks, and you can now embed Dash and do, dashboarding and stuff within Jupyter notebooks, and really gives you a full end-to-end way to represent data within your environment. And what's really good about this is now you can start sending this up within your organization, and they can actually look at this and be like, all right, what am I getting out of this? All right, I can see this information. This can be shared, laterally to your sysadmins. This could be sent to your, application owners when you're doing those threat hunts. And it really gives them a visual of what you were seeing when you were doing those threat hunts. And the good thing about this, right, is when you're starting to think about this is now, how do I relate this up, not just laterally within my environment? How do I look, maybe up within the organization? And so being able to relate this back to the business is going to be something that's, really important, right? So the last slide really focused on the tactical, the technical, right? So yes, that's really good. That's your traditional threat hunt. Hey, I was looking for a certain TTP. I was sifting through some logs. I saw that this particular IP address was performing some password spray attacks or some brute forcing or, whatever that might be. But what's the so what? Well, if like I guess certain APT group that leverages those techniques, I have here an example from a threat report that we did earlier in the year. And the reason I chose this one is, the dark side of the colonial pipeline is, what's really good is trying to relate it to, your executives. I would think, if you're, especially in the Southeast, right, I think the colonial pipeline, that hit people at the pumps, right, where gas prices went up. And it was one of those things where there was, worry if, hey, am I going to have gas next week, as I'm driving to work, or if, hey, I'm trying to take my kids to soccer practice or something. So finding certain groups, not necessarily to make it, scare tactics, but just to make it relatable so that the executives can understand why you're doing what you're doing as a threat hunter is really important. So be able to tell that story, look for recent attacks that were, publicized within the media. Then go and find which threat groups were the ones behind that. Look and see what, attack, techniques they were using, and then go look for those in your environment. That way you can then relate that and tell a better story. And then when you're telling that story, executives, they speak in dollars, right? So being able to look at, hey, what's the average ransom demand? What's business downtime? What does that look like from a business risk and reputation standpoint? So really being able to relate that back to the business is really key when you're building this. So I'm going to show you here on the next slide, just a quick format of what this is, but this is just hopefully gets you thinking around, all right, when I'm writing my hypothesis to go do a threat hunt, that I'm not just writing this one-liner, I'm not just writing this one little, detector or analytic or whatever you call your particular, hypothesis, that, there's a reason behind this. And then being able to then relate that up to the business. So going in is like, all right, how do we operationalize this? I think, that's well and good, right? I think, we would love to be able to do that. But here's just a quick little framework, and you can take this, add to this. This is, I try to simplify it as much as possible, for the audience today. And I know, going back to earlier, not every organization is going to have a full team dedicated to be able to do this. For us, this is what we do from a day-to-day basis. Our cyber threat intelligence team, we have different people that work on different parts of this. We have technical writers, we have people that can actually write the analytics and really build these polished things. So I get it, this can be a lot, but, hopefully it just gives you, some concepts to think about, is if there is that one that pops up sometimes and be like, what, I remember what Nick said at, BSidesGVL, this would be a perfect opportunity to not let me just stop at this individualized threat hunt. Let me take this, put this into a report, because I know my boss or my boss's boss could then leverage this to then go to the CFO to help supplement and help me buy that new EDR solution that I was wanting, or help me, get that SIM I've been asking for the past 3 years, or whatever that might be. So hopefully this just gives you some things to think about. So starting at the top, right? And this is, pretty straightforward. Document info, nothing groundbreaking here, right? So just, what are we talking about here? Date of the report, who prepared it? Did we do the hunt? This is really thinking about a modular threat intelligence report. So you can start with, hey, did we do a hunt? What was the objective of this? What was the abstract? If you do TLPs, a traffic light protocol, and right, is this sensitive to us only? Can this be shared? You can put a lot of different things that go into that document info. One of the things we like to use a lot of times is the data being used, right? Is there, as you're trying to share this maybe to your, maybe you have a work group or some Discord that you work with people on the outside, or, just some friends of yours you want to share this report to, is, what are they looking for when they're doing that? The next section is really around the threat info, right? So that summary. So we talked to, that slide earlier around dark side is, what are we talking about? What tactics and techniques did dark side use as part of that? Any recommendations that you can make, the references, really do a really good job of laying out what that threat actor or whatever they were doing. And then the final piece is the actual hunt data. So once you've kind of laid this out, you have your document info, you have a really good narrative, right, explaining what you're looking for and why it's important. This is where you can start getting into building the hunt pieces. Is this having a notebook that you can actually go in and do an actual threat hunt against? This is for somebody that maybe you're an instant responder, maybe you don't, maybe you are a security admin and you don't have a SIM and you just have maybe a syslog server, or maybe you just have logs sitting on systems and you have to go run scripts to go do these grabs and do this, whatever that is, there's ways of doing that. And really mapping that out from what data fields do I need? What technology do I need to use? Are there certain API hooks that I need to pull into? Maybe I'm in AWS and I need to go out and, do pulls and maybe store information within S3 buckets and be able to do flat file analysis or whatever that might look like. And then be able to pull all that data together, correlate it together, and then be able to do metrics and reporting against that. So what does that look in practice? So here's just, quick examples, right? So, having the report data, making sure who the audience is, that's really important. If you're doing a threat intelligence report and it's, really focused around, just maybe being informative to the executives, maybe you don't have the threat hunt stuff at the bottom. You can still write these threat reports and have this same type of structure and kind of give that objective, what you're looking for, what the data is required. And then here's, what we were talking about earlier, right? So here's that information around the example. Here's, a quick screenshot. Here's some references. And executives love this stuff. They talk, security used to be one of those things where most of the time, it was, one of these things that it was a cost center. But more and more organizations are starting to see where security is helping, it's almost like your insurance policy. It's keeping them out of the news. It's helping the business up and running. And they use this as a way to talk to their, fellow friends. Like their CEOs all the time, that when we share these documents, they're sharing it with their fellow CEOs. And we get calls, wanting this same type of stuff. So, a lot of cool things that you can do here. So, going in a little deeper, right? So just giving you some kind of, what does that document look like? What were the important pieces? What are the recommendations? What were those MITRE attack mappings back to that? And really giving you a sense of, what was the attack actor doing? So now examples of, what does that threat hunt look like? So, we mentioned earlier around, threat hunting. It's like within Jupyter, there's a lot of capabilities here. You can do a lot of this in OneNote. You can do a lot of this in Word, or, insert your favorite text editor. But within Jupyter, the reason we like that is when we're writing these narratives and writing these within a notebook, is we're not just sitting there. You can actually go and take action on that. So you can write embedded, Python commands and searches and stuff here, where you can do ML AI models. You can go and search and do parsing of logs, using data frames to be able to go out and do the searching and stuff. This is definitely not meant to be a deep dive into Jupyter notebooks and data science and all of that. But there's a lot of cool things that you can do within these to be able to do those threat hunts. And this, I think, is even more important, for people that maybe don't have a SIM, or maybe you're an instant responder. Is these make really good instant response playbooks, to where maybe you have different playbooks based on if I'm doing an investigation on a Windows machine, or if I'm doing an investigation on a Linux box, or maybe I'm looking at an application, maybe one of your applications is beginning to hit really hard and you're trying to figure out, who's the, IP address. What kind of attacks have they been doing? So you can build a lot of custom parsers, a lot of different things here to do those detections. And here's an example, right, of the, here's some Apache logs, right? So being able to go in and doing that deep dive around, hey, parsing that, trying to find those user agent strings, or who the referrer was, or who are those remote hosts. And then you can really build those graphs out to be able to do that threat hunt directly from this notebook. So just like you would type in a Word document, or just like you would type in any other text editor, you're writing these, but then you're also within the same document writing the raw code to be able to go and do those threat hunts for this particular information. And so to wrap it up, because I want to leave some time here at the end for some questions. So this is where you can really work on, building that pipeline. So you saw that kind of modular approach, and like I said, not every organization is going to have this, but sometimes you don't have to do this all the time, right? I mean, if you're that one guy that does security, use this as just a tool, maybe every once in a while, to be able to tell a story that you're trying to tell. So what does that pipeline look like? Starting at the bottom, right? If you have an intelligence team, they identify that threat. Maybe you see it on Twitter. Maybe you see it in some email that you're subscribed to from some type of threat intelligence source. Then you can create that threat report. Start at the top level. Think of the business risk. Tell that story of what's important there. Then you can start building that technical hunt using notebooks if you want to. You can still use your normal tools. This is just trying to introduce, kind of maybe a new concept. Go and then start looking at your SIEM, looking at your EDR, looking at your firewalls, looking at your IDS, IPS, whatever tooling that you might have there, and really building those pieces out. And then be able to take that report, bundle all that up together. And then once you do that hunt, put the evidence of what you found there, right? Put those in tables, put that in an appendix. Maybe the executives don't care, but as it moves up through the organization, they can scroll or go as deep as they want to, right? And be able to do that. And ultimately just be able to show value within the organization. So let your threat intelligence team, let your threat hunters now be somebody that the organization sees as an important piece of the organization. Not some hackers that are sitting in the basement. What was the old quote? The 600-pound hacker, right? That lives in their mom's basement. We all know we're not that, right? So if you're from a threat hunter, you like doing like doing the blue team stuff, is try to be, show your value within the organization, right? And raise your hand and be able to do those things. So I think I'm coming up at least about 5 minutes here. So I appreciate it. Appreciate the time today. Hopefully y'all learned some new things here. And I will open this up to questions.